I'm Darren Morton.
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift,
The Lifestyle Medicine podcast, where we dive into the science of health and well-being. Welcome. Good to see you again, Simon. How you doing?
You too, Darren. Very well, thank you. Doing very well.
Very nice. Hey, I've got an idea that I could be completely way off, and I'd love your thoughts on this. So
Wouldn't be the first time. Sorry.
What's that?
Wouldn't be the first time.
Wouldn't be the first time. No, that's correct. I had this interesting experience where I love hiking, and I know that you enjoy a bit of hiking as well. And we were doing the overland track in Tasmania, which is rated as one of the most picturesque hikes in all the world, in fact. And I've done it several occasions now. Each year at the end of in September, we take a group of university students to do it. So I'm looking forward to doing it again. But one of the amazing things about the walk is that it has different terrains that you go through. And what I found, and I was chatting because I was debriefing with a friend on it later, and what we found is that we had quite different parts that we enjoyed most. And for me, what I love is when I'm in a wide open space. Like I love big. I love it. I love it when I can just see a long way and I can see mountains in the distance and it just feels vast. I love that. Whereas my friend was saying, oh, I love it when we get into the thick of the forest, and there are times where you can't see hardly anything because the forest is so thick. And anyway, when we started debriefing, I thought, what is it that I like that? And then they were reflecting on the same thing. And what we realised, and once again, this could be way off here, but I'm very much a big picture person. I love big picture views of things, whereas this friend that I was debriefing with loves details, loves getting in the taking the deep dive, and getting in the nitty gritty of it. And I wondered to myself, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Could it be partly a personality thing? Could it be that for those of us who do have that sort of enjoy that big picture view, we actually enjoy different kinds of hiking experiences? Yeah. What do you reckon about it?
Or different kinds of life experiences in general. So as you started telling that story, I was asking myself, what do I like? And before you even shared the big picture idea, I thought, I like the open spaces too. And in fact, if I visualize myself, for example, in a forest or, walking through a narrow trail, after a while I become anxious.
Really?
Will this ever end? Can I find my way out of this? Am I getting lost here? Et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Right.
So I definitely like the wide open spaces. I like for me there's also it invokes something about freedom and ability to be anywhere. Look, interestingly, for a similar reason, it's probably why I like the idea of flying, because even though you're in this kind of cigar tube, it does feel like you can be anywhere, but the thought of being underwater and scuba diving absolutely terrifies me.
Yeah.
Completely terrifies me.
Yeah.
And I'm also, similar to you, I'm also someone who gets driven crazy by detail. But I love big picture. I love exploring big ideas, and I wonder whether it's not just not just hiking, but things, other things in life. And now that I say that, I'm not necessarily calling anything to mind that represents this, but at some level, I think it must be true that our primary personality features and the, if you like, the way that we roll does play an influence on the sorts of things that we engage with, the level of satisfaction that we might derive from those things, and therefore, perhaps the more that we do those things over time.
Yeah, well, look, you know what? Yeah, it was just a thought that occurred to me, and I've often reflected on that for when I think about the other hikes that I like to do. I ask myself the question: do you get big views? Do you get to see that big vision? So you know what? Even if you and I are the only ones that have this sort of aptitude, what we do now, well, actually, we're not alone, because what I'm really intrigued by is the fact that seems to be this common quest that we humans go on in a variety of different disciplines that actually are interested in what's the big narrative, what's the unified kind of bring it all together kind of big picture view. And certainly we've seen this in physics, and I have a great interest in physics. It was actually my favourite subject in Year 12. If I didn't become a physiologist, I was actually going to become a physicist. But what's really interesting about physics is that it's a profoundly mysterious world. That's what we've discovered. One of the key things from physics, and certainly when Einstein came along and discovered, the theory of general relativity, and understood that it wasn't the way Isaac Newton, and even though he was a brilliant mind and he came up with these Newton's laws of motions and motion of all the rest of it, Einstein came along and flipped this whole crazy idea on its head, and we now know, for example, that time slows down when you get close to a strong gravitational field, or when you speed up, and just things that seem completely bizarre. So he came up with that. Later on, we came up with quantum mechanics, which just gets even stranger. And because basically, what we know is when you start to get down to the, to the quantum level, it's just bizarre. Like you can't actually predict where something will be or how it's moving unless you observe it. And there's a whole lot of really interesting spin-offs that come from that.
And an atom on this side of the world can influence an atom on that side of the world.
That's correct. Yeah. But what's really interesting, and Einstein spent the last 30 years of his career, really, fascinatingly enough, a lot of his great insights actually came when he was quite a young person and in a very short space of time. But he spent pretty much the latter part of his life really just trying to go, how do we unite all this? What would a unified sort of one-stop shop look like in terms of understanding how the universe operates? Because what's interesting, if you look at relativity and you look at quantum mechanics, they don't play nice together. And it's almost like, in fact, when you try and combine them, the mathematics just goes AWOL, like it doesn't behave at all. And so there's this constant, Einstein was very much involved in this common quest to understand what's the unifying laws, how does the universe behave and why does it behave the way it does. And then, obviously... sorry.
Another very famous physicist was on that quest too, Professor Stephen Hawking, who's now passed away. But I read his book, A Brief History of Time.
Yes.
I think maybe back in the 1990s, the late 1990s, and it had an extraordinary impact on me at the time. And it's interesting with the passage of time, which is one of the things that we're kind of talking about here. With the passage of time, we get the opportunity to look back on our lives and view things differently. We can. It's a little like when you when you climb to a mountaintop, for example, you can look back out over where you've walked, and now you can see the relationship of this place and that place to each other that you hadn't been able to see when you were in the midst of them. And in the same way, I look back at that period of time in my life, the mid-late 1990s. I was reading this. I was also getting very, very deeply immersed in systemic theories that supported family therapy and couples therapy, which was the work that I was doing at the time. And now when I look back, 25, 30 years later, I can see that there was a confluence of these things in my mind. And what absolutely galvanized me in reading Stephen Hawking's book was this idea of a gut or grand unified theory of everything. And just that idea just inherently appealed to me, that there must be some unifying theory under which we can kind of consistently arrange everything else.
See that the fact that that very much appealed to you, this whole idea of a unified theory. And in fact, Stephen Hawking's book, Brief History of Time, had a big impact on me as well. And in fact, one of the things that I loved right at the end of the book, I don't know if you recall this, but he concludes by saying, these are my own words of the sentiment, but is that, when we one day come up and find this unified theory of everything, it won't be the kind of thing that just only special scientists or philosophers can discuss. It's the kind of thing that just ordinary people like you and I could chat about on the street. And I thought, wow, this is so not only was he saying that there is this existing, unified theory, but that it would be simple and that it would be, inherently beautiful in its own right. And so what's interesting is that obviously Stephen Hawking dedicated his career to it, and many other philosophers as well, and scientists. And we haven't found it yet, have we? They haven't come up with it.
We haven't.
And there have been attempts. They've got their string theory, and there's all these other things that are happening. But it interests me. So we haven't discovered that yet, and we still haven't figured out this way to unite, relativity and quantum mechanics. And interestingly enough, because I'm interested in philosophy as well. And that Forrest Gump, I love. He actually has that sentiment. I forget where it is. The wise words of Forrest Gump, where he talks about. I think he says something to the effect of, or Mum used to say that life's a bit like a box of chocolates, and that all things. Some people say all things happen for a reason, and others say it's a bit chaotic. And the truth is, maybe there's a bit of both going on. And that's his insight, which really is a really nice and succinct way to communicate what we understand from a physics point of view, the way that the world does work. But why would I talk about this? Why would I bring up this topic of a unified theory on a lifestyle medicine podcast? And the reason for it is that it's been really fascinating to watch that there is this common pursuit of a unified theory to explain, why it is that chronic diseases happen, what's gone wrong. And I know, and maybe I'll, not to put you on the spot, but certainly, one of our sort of mentors, I would say, Professor Gary Egger has had, some work to do in this space. And, he's obviously sharp mind and has been very interested in sort of looking forward. And we know that, that we've got these chronic conditions. There's a heart disease, there's the type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, neurodegeneration. But what he was looking at, and his argument was here, that just like we know that there are a whole lot of different infectious type diseases, at the end of the day, it was really this understanding of germ theory that actually helped us. It was sort of unified them all to realize there was a common theme here, a common thing that was actually, resulting and manifesting in all these different types of conditions. And obviously what he went on and other researchers, this quest to understand, well, is there a germ theory for chronic disease? And if so, what it is? Can you remember how he described it? What his takeaway was?
The
root cause, Gary's?
Are you talking about Gary's increasingly long acronym?
Well, that's true. Actually, that's a really interesting insight, because we know that lifestyle medicine, in terms of it's the domains of lifestyle medicine, the pillars of lifestyle medicine, have grown over time. So this has been interesting, because historically it was really quite focused on nutrition. And then, I'd say activity, exercise came along pretty quickly after that. And then stress was added to it. And then we had social connection and love, and Dean Ornish was a big proponent of that. And then, we have sleep being added in there. Then substance use was added in there. But yes, certainly.
And very importantly, can I say, a dozen or so years ago, we really started seeing a lot of attention paid to the behavioural change component of this, like
absolutely
the process that we need to employ. Otherwise, pillars of lifestyle medicine remain interesting but otherwise unhelpful pieces of information. Yes,
that's correct. So it was interesting as these pillars sort of evolved, and now we have 6 established as recognised by most of the lifestyle medicine communities around the world. There's agitation for more, and certainly I think we've chatted on the podcast already about nature.
Nature, yeah. Yep.
I personally would love to see, and maybe we should write a paper on this, Simon, the idea of meaning and purpose. I think
Well,
as
meaning and purpose is already starting to make its way in. Meaning, purpose, and spirituality, I
yes,
guess.
yes,
If you think about those three, and also, there's questions I think around the possible intersection between social connection and meaning, purpose, and
absolutely,
spirituality. So
yes,
I think there's a lot of thinking work that still needs to be done here to
yes.
get clarity about what might be the best way or the most useful way to represent these principles of what it means to live well.
Yes, and certainly Gary Egger, he kept growing this thing, and so he actually, I think, as it stands at the moment, I think there are about 15 or 16 pillars, as he would call it. It was the nasty malodors, no, nasty odors with
Yeah,
something or other. That was the
yeah,
acronym.
nasty malodors. That's 15.
There we go.
Yeah,
And so what's interesting, but what he was saying is these are the factors, these lifestyle determinants that were actually contributing. Whilst he was growing the pillars, he was actually also saying there's a common theme, a common thread through which they then funnel out and flow onto these chronic conditions. And he gave the name metaflammation, which is interesting. And certainly, we talk a lot nowadays, and we hear a lot about these sort of inflammatory processes, and we're not talking about the acute chronic, the acute inflammatory processes that happen in an immediate sort of roll your ankle and it puffs up and swells to no end. But it's this systemic throughout the body, low grade inflammation that we know then can flow on and cause all sorts of different ill effects. So this whole idea of inflammation, or what he called it metaflammation, because it was linked to metabolism as well, I think it has some substance. What do you have you given much time ruminating or thinking about whether you like it or not?
Lift is supported by the Lift Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe, in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
Look, I like the idea, and the metaflammation idea also, I think, is or an important element of the idea of metaflammation is that often when we talk about inflammation in medical terms, we're talking about, or health terms, we're talking about inflammation of a particular organ. You've got an inflamed eye, or I don't know, an inflamed liver, or whatever it might be. But the idea of metaflammation is that this is more of a slow burn, widespread inflammation that overarches everything else. So it's not necessarily going to manifest as, pancreatitis or hepatitis or uveitis in your eye or rhinitis in your nose or something like that. But it's doing damage nevertheless. It's causing damage in your body, and one of the trains of thought then that becomes important here is if we're talking about something like that, something widespread, quite subtle, that ranges all through the body, then we need to think differently about what might be behind that. It's not sufficient to try and map a particular cause to a particular organ or a particular etiology to a particular health outcome. We need to think in much bigger picture terms and much broader terms. And that, I think, is where we circle back to our ideas about guts or grand unified theories.
It's true. This is interesting because it's almost like in this attempt to get narrow, you have to keep going broad again, and it keeps calling out. Because I actually reviewed a paper on this where they looked at inflammation, these low-grade systemic, inflammatory responses, this metaflammation. And if you actually look at all the pillars of lifestyle medicine, we actually know that they do activate these processes. So poor nutrition is inflammatory. Interestingly enough, activity, underactivity is inflammatory. Intriguingly enough, overactivity can be, and I'm really reluctant to share that message, because people will go, "Oh, that's it then. That's it. That just gave me a great excuse not to move." And it's not the case at all. Obviously we're talking about these very high-end athletes that are doing crazy ultra marathons. We know that, it sets up, inflammatory processes as well. But we know lack of sleep, is pro-inflammatory. We know that social connectedness, loneliness,
absence of social connectedness,
absence of social connection is actually pro-inflammatory.
Yeah.
And so,
and we know the same about things like depression and anxiety and stress. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have all of it. So it's actually a nice model. And obviously I love the work of Gary Eger. It's a nice way of understanding that all of these lifestyle determinants, they do, what he would argue is flow through this common mechanism. It's almost like this unified theory that it brings it all down to its inflammatory processes within the body that then spill on and outflow to these, range of different, disease states that we see.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is there utility in that? Because what I'm interested in thinking, okay, if we, in germ theory, we understand that, okay, it's that particular bug that does that particular thing. Yes, it's germ theory because it all belongs to that cluster of germs, and there are different inflammatory markers too. We know that inflammation isn't just one thing. It's there's all these different, sort of all these things that are occurring, from a physiological point of view. With the germ theory, we could identify, it's that particular bug. Well, let's do what we need to knock that particular bug on its head. And then, and in doing so, we help to manage that downstream effect of that particular condition. Do you think there's utility in this way of thinking about?
I think there's extraordinary utility in it for a number of reasons, and there's some challenges as well. So if we start at the utility side of it, first of all, any sort of grand unified theory is going to be systemic by its nature. It has to be, because it has to account for the operation of multiple systems within whatever that world is, whether it's the world of health or the world of the universe, and so on. So there must be a way of accommodating systemic interactions within a grand unified theory. And for me, things work systemically. It doesn't make sense to me to think otherwise. That there can be a simple linear, for example, cause and effect between something. I drink alcohol and I get hepatitis, or I rub dirt in my eye and I get uveitis, or I put a handful of grass seed under my nose and I get rhinitis. I mean, they're all simple linear explanations, and we can be reductionistic and turn those things into that if we want. But the truth, I think, lies in systemic understandings of the world, and a unified theory does that. It supports that approach. So that's one reason why I think it's valuable. The second reason is perhaps a little more obscure, and one of the reasons that I like this approach is that it keeps us in a place of not knowing. And it keeps us having to say, we think we understand a little more, but we're not completely sure yet. And I think intellectually, cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, even that's a really good place to occupy. The space in the world that says, possibly, probably, but I'm just not sure. I feel like there's more there. I feel like I don't understand everything, and that, of course, keeps us curious. It keeps us engaged. It keeps us searching after better, deeper, more apt explanations for things. So that's another reason why I like this idea, because it is a big idea, and to some extent it does feel a little out of reach. It doesn't come easily. It's not as much as it's appealing, a grand unified theory is not going to be simple. It's not going to be something that we can, write on the back of a postage stamp, for example. So that's a reason that I think pursuit of these ideas is valuable. On the other side, one of the challenges that we're going to face is then, and this is a discussion you and I have had before, is implementing useful responses based on that data. And the more general your explanation is, and I can't see that a grand unified theory is going to be something that delves deeply into specifics. The more general a theory is, the more that prompts us to think generally. But in fact, sometimes we do need to think specifically, and sometimes when we're implementing something, we need to find a way of making this thing work in this way with this person in this location at this time, for example. And that's a challenge, and that's essentially, I think, that's essentially a translation exercise. It's like taking one language and then try to express those ideas in a different language. That's a challenge for all of us at any time. And as someone who's currently immersed in the process of continuing to learn a second language that's not my native language, but a language that I have to learn because that's the language of the culture I live in now. That task of taking the ideas that are in my mind and turning them into something functional and useful that's a challenge. And I think that will remain a challenge for us.
Well, I can say that I'm still trying to learn the language of the culture that I am immersed in. You know, well, brother, to move on to another one. But a couple of reflections there. One is that I'm interested. It's intriguing to me that you say you love the mystery that
absolutely.
You love the curiosity. That's not generally how we humans like to function. We like to know how things work, and obviously this fuels our obsession with trying to understand and trying to create these unified theories. So it's an interesting that I would say you're quite atypical in that regard, and I actually would say that it's a sign of maturity. Certainly, I'm interested in issues of faith as well, and it's a sign of maturity to be able to go, you know what, I'm comfortable with knowing that you can't know everything and that there's mystery there. So that's
absolutely.
The other thing that jumped out to me, just as you were describing getting down to specifics, I find myself, I'm really interested in things like public health. And I think it's, once again, it's because it's the big picture. I want to talk to people about eating more fruits and vegetables and being more active as compared to eat these particular berries at this particular time of day because, for this particular person. So once again, it probably says something about, I love the fact that there are people that are interested in that sort of drilling down. But, once again, probably it speaks to my big picture brain. But you know what, Gary Egger, just to progress, this whole idea of this unified theory, I've been interested that there are other attempts that are emerging. So metaflammation, I really like what the work of Gary Egger and what he's done in that space. More recently, because I have an interest, and you too, in mental health, Chris Palmer, he wrote the book Brain Energy, and it's quite interesting. There's been some interesting feedback on his thoughts, but what he ties it all back to is mitochondrial dysfunction. And he says that and he talks about lifestyle medicine very openly, and he says, but all of these pillars of lifestyle medicine, when not done well, actually feed into affecting our mitochondria.
Yeah.
And, for those who are not familiar with your mitochondria, I remember when I was studying exercise physiology and I first learned about mitochondria, I went, I love those things. I want more of them. They were my favorite organelle, real quickly, because they're, really simply put, we know that's the place where the energy metabolism occurs. And I just thought the more of them, and we know that athletes have high number and, high volume. And so I just thought, wow, I love those things. And so what he's looking at, and there's good evidence emerging here that what happens is that these poor, when we don't practice poor lifestyle habits, actually feed into dysregulating our mitochondrial function, which then affects obviously energy metabolism. And there's some really, quite compelling studies now that are coming through showing that if you can do things to improve, mitochondrial function, it can improve even conditions that we historically, like from a mental health perspective, even, treatment-resistant conditions that we didn't think would be responsive to lifestyle interventions. And so it's quite an exciting space. So, we've got Gary's metaflammation theory. We've got Chris Palmer coming up with his sort of, mitochondrial dysfunction. You got any thoughts on that before we go on to another one?
Well, just one, and that is what else might there be that we haven't yet come across? So we've got metaflammation and mitochondrial. Maybe there's another element to all of this that that we just haven't quite kind of caught hold of yet.
You certainly,
one of the challenges here is that we live at this minuscule, absolutely minuscule point in time.
Yes.
You and I have been chatting for 30 minutes in universal time terms. I mean, that's smaller than a fraction of a drop. It's just tiny. And so one of the challenges that we face is that we have to push ourselves to step back to see how much knowledge has changed, diversified, how ideas have kind of grown and then declined over time, to really understand that although we speak with some measure of confidence right now about, for example, metaflammation and mitochondria, there may well be another explanatory mechanism that we're just not even thinking about. And perhaps an example of that is the idea of dark matter in the universe, to go back to our physics discussion. Physicists and astronomers all over the world agree that dark matter exists, and now try and find out what it is. Good luck. We don't know what it is. We don't know what it does. We think it does something important because it's there, but beyond that, it remains a bit of a mystery. So it's sort of dark, perhaps physically, but also metaphorically as well.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what, and I completely concur with what you're talking about. In fact, it frustrates me and surprises me immensely when I hear scientists talking in a way that it sounds like we've got it all sewn up. And I just think, surely as scientists, we should be more aware of the fact that this world and our bodies and our physiology is just a mysterious place, and we're scratching the surface, because the more we learn, the more we realize that, wow, this is more profound and mysterious than we ever imagined. So, to my mind, scientists shouldn't be locked into thinking that, hey, we're bedding this down. Probably what they should be thinking is that this is becoming more mysterious than we ever imagined. But I love the idea of this common quest. And, it's just been really interesting to me that this common pursuit of trying to understand, what's the root cause? What is the one thing that we might modify that would clear up all of these messes in terms of chronic conditions? And, we've seen, obviously metaflammation and, more recently mitochondrial dysfunction. I think we went through that a bit with the gut microbiome, and it's still, that's still featured. I think that we've thought, hey, we've got, up to 100 trillion, bacteria living in our gut in a symbiotic relationship with our human cells. Maybe when that gets unhappy, it spills over, and it does. We know there's that strong connection there. So, I think there's the gut microbiome's been thrown out there. I think epigenetic dysregulation. That's when we it's like when we learn the next thing, it's like, wow, this is it, and we're always on the search for this sort of magic bullet that if we get that fixed, it'll fix everything else. And so I love that. I love the pursuit.
And I think that, the other significant emergence currently is the idea of precision health, which has been growing for a number of years now. And I kind of look. I also find the idea of precision health very, very appealing because we know that for most things in life, we kind of pick something that works generally well for most people in most circumstances most of the time. And if you think about things being distributed around a bell curve, we're really talking about that kind of central part of the distribution. So a lot of our approaches, kind of work reasonably well if you're in there. As soon as you start moving towards the extremities, those things work less and less well, and maybe even they don't work that well for people sometimes in the centre of the distribution as well. So precision medicine, I think, has the potential to be one of those applications of, our grand unified theory of how things work. If we can understand at that level, understand at that very, very high level what's going on, and understand those principles, then perhaps we can turn that knowledge into working individually and really focus our intervention and treatment efforts to get the best outcome for that person in that place at that time.
Yeah, and I agree. And I love. It's interesting, precision medicine. We have Dr. Cam McDonald who teaches into our program here at Avondale on precision medicine, and it's every time I hear presentations, and obviously he's a very dynamic presenter as well, but I'm just like, wow, this makes so much sense. But interestingly enough, for me, as my big picture brain, I keep coming back to the middle of the bell curve, like I'm thinking. So anyway, I love the fact that there are people out on the tails, doing the work and helping those people that really need help. So we need to wrap this up, but it's interesting to me. I'm fascinated by learning the science of this pursuit for this unified theory. Trying to figure out what for chronic disease, what is the germ theory of chronic disease, and I think we've got a whole lot to learn, like you say. And maybe it's nothing we've even touched on yet. We don't even know about, and we're about yet to discover. And that's a beautiful thing too. But what's interesting to me is as we keep trying to narrow in, we have to keep them pulling back out again and realizing that all of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, all these things that we know help chronic conditions, regardless of what mechanism you want to apply, whether it's metaflammation, whether it's mitochondrial dysfunction, whether it's epigenomic expression or gut microbiome changes, they all feed through that. They all influence these things. So, I think I'm fascinated and I love hearing about this search for this unified theory. But to me, where where it gets really pragmatic is that these pillars of lifestyle medicine, that we're always banging on about, they just work. How they work? Well, you know what? Let's muse over that. Let's chat about that. Let's discover more about that. But at the end of the day, they just work. And I think that's a really important message to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good chatting with you, brother.
Always a pleasure. Nice to see you.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.